Imagine waking up tomorrow with a pounding headache so intense you can barely see. No pharmacy, no doctor, no hospital, no internet. Just pain. Now imagine the only solution anyone can offer is to drill a hole into your skull using a sharpened stone. As terrifying as that sounds, for thousands of years, that wasn't considered desperation. It was medicine. And strangely enough, some of those patients survived. The real story of how humans fought disease before modern medicine isn't a story about primitive people waiting to be rescued by science. It's a story of observation, experimentation, sacrifice, and discoveries made across tens of thousands of years. In fact, every pill in your medicine cabinet carries traces of decisions made by people who lived before cities, before writing, and even before our own species fully understood the world around it. To understand why, we need to go back to a time when getting sick wasn't an inconvenience. It was one of the greatest threats a human being could face. Picture a small group of hunter-gatherers moving through a cold landscape 50,000 years ago. Every day is a struggle. Food is uncertain. Predators are everywhere. Injuries are common. And hidden among all those dangers is something even more deadly. Infection. A simple cut can become fatal. A fever can spread through a camp.
A stomach illness can kill within days. Today, most people recover from common illnesses without giving them much thought. Back then, there was no guarantee of recovery at all. So how did humans survive long enough to build civilizations? The answer begins with something surprisingly modern: care. Researchers studying ancient human remains have repeatedly found evidence that some individuals lived for years with severe disabilities that should have made survival impossible. One of the most famous examples came from a cave in northern Iraq. There, scientists uncovered the remains of an ancient Neanderthal man. At first glance, he seemed ordinary. Then they examined his skeleton. He had lost the use of one arm. He suffered from serious joint disease. His vision was likely impaired. He carried multiple injuries that would have made hunting extremely difficult. Yet he lived into middle age. That shouldn't have happened.
Not in a world where every person needed to contribute to survive. Unless someone was helping him for years, feeding him, protecting him, caring for him. Most people think medicine began with herbs or surgery. But the first form of healthcare may have been something much simpler: refusing to abandon the sick. Long before hospitals existed, survival depended on communities deciding that injured people were still worth saving. And that decision changed everything. Because once people began caring for the vulnerable, they also gained something else: time. Time to learn. Time to observe. Time to experiment. And that's when humanity stumbled upon one of its greatest discoveries. Nature was full of medicine. The problem was figuring out which plants healed and which ones killed. Imagine the process. One person chews a leaf and becomes violently ill. Another drinks a bark infusion and feels better. Someone notices a certain root helps stomach pain. A different plant reduces swelling. Generation after generation, tiny pieces of information accumulate. No chemistry, no microscopes, just survival. Most people never realize how much of modern medicine began this way. Take a walk through a forest and you're looking at what was once humanity's pharmacy. Researchers studying ancient remains discovered something fascinating hidden inside the teeth of Neanderthals. Tiny traces of plants. Not food plants, medicinal plants. That detail matters because it suggests these ancient humans weren't accidentally eating them. They were choosing them, using them, treating themselves. And then scientists uncovered an even more remarkable clue. High in the Alps, preserved in ice for over 5,000 years, a man died carrying what looked like a strange collection of objects. For years, nobody understood their purpose. Then researchers examined them more closely. Among his belongings were medicinal fungi. Today, those fungi are known to contain compounds with antibacterial and anti-inflammatory effects. Even more intriguing, the man appears to have suffered from intestinal parasites. The mushrooms he carried may have been part of his treatment. Think about that for a moment.
Thousands of years before pharmaceutical companies existed, people were already building portable medical kits. But this wasn't the whole picture, because when herbs failed, ancient humans attempted something far more dramatic, something that still shocks modern researchers. Around the world, archaeologists have discovered ancient skulls with perfectly deliberate holes cut into them. Not damage from battle, not accidents, surgery. The practice is known as trepanation, and evidence of it appears across continents separated by oceans and thousands of miles. Europe, Asia, Africa, South America. Different cultures, different languages, yet somehow many arrived at the same astonishing idea. If a problem seemed trapped inside the head, perhaps opening the skull could help. Today, that sounds horrifying, but here's the part that surprises scientists. Many of those patients survived. How do we know?
Because bone tissue grew back around the openings. The skulls healed, in some cases extensively. That means these weren't random acts. They were procedures, repeated enough times to develop techniques, passed from one generation to the next. Ancient surgery existed thousands of years before written medical textbooks. And behind these procedures stood a person every community depended on. The healer, the shaman, the keeper of knowledge. Imagine living in a world without books. No libraries, no databases, no medical schools. Everything known about healing exists inside human memory. One person remembers which plants reduce pain, which roots calm fevers, which wounds need cleaning, which treatments have failed before. Lose that person, and an entire encyclopedia disappears overnight. Anthropologists studying traditional societies repeatedly found individuals occupying this role. Part physician, part scientist, part spiritual guide. They weren't merely treating symptoms. They were preserving generations of accumulated experience. Researchers examining a 12,000-year-old burial in the Eastern Mediterranean found evidence of a woman who appears to have held extraordinary status within her community. Her grave contained unusual animal remains and ceremonial objects, unlike those surrounding ordinary burials. The conclusion? She may have been a healer, a person whose knowledge was considered so valuable that her death required special recognition. And then, the story takes an unexpected turn. Because one of the most important medical discoveries humans ever made wasn't a plant, or a tool, or even a person. It was a symptom.
Fever. Most of us see fever as the enemy, something to eliminate as quickly as possible. But for much of human history, people noticed something curious. Sometimes the sick improved when their bodies became hotter, not cooler. Many traditional societies responded to fever by adding warmth. Extra blankets, closer proximity to fires, more heat. For centuries, nobody understood why. Then, modern science provided an explanation. Many disease-causing organisms struggle when body temperature rises. Fever isn't always a malfunction. Often, it's part of the body's defense strategy. Without understanding immune systems, ancient humans had discovered a pattern, and they adjusted their behavior accordingly. That's the remarkable thing about early medicine. It often worked long before anyone knew why. Again and again, humans found useful solutions first. Explanations came later. But there was still a brutal reality no amount of knowledge could fully overcome. Death was everywhere. Childhood was especially dangerous. In ancient societies, many children never reached adulthood. Infections spread quickly, injuries became deadly, disease constantly threatened survival. Yet humanity endured. Not because our ancestors had perfect medicine, but because they never stopped learning. Every successful remedy became a lesson. Every failure became information. Every generation inherited discoveries from the generations before. Which brings us back to something most people overlook every day: a simple painkiller. More than 3,000 years ago, people were already using willow bark to ease pain and reduce fever. They didn't know the chemistry, they only knew it helped. Centuries later, scientists isolated the active compound and eventually transformed it into one of the most widely used medications in history: aspirin.
The distance between chewing bark beside a campfire and swallowing a tablet in a modern kitchen feels enormous. But the connection is direct. One leads to the other. The technology changed, the human goal never did. Relief, survival, another day alive. The next time you open a medicine cabinet, it's worth remembering what you're really looking at. Not just bottles and tablets, not just products of modern science. You're looking at the latest chapter in a story tens of thousands of years old. A story written by injured hunters, careful observers, ancient healers, and communities that refuse to let their sick die alone. A story built from countless experiments performed without laboratories, countless risks taken without guarantees, and countless discoveries made by people who never knew their names would be forgotten. Because medicine didn't suddenly appear in a laboratory. It evolved, slowly, patient by patient, generation by generation. And hidden inside every modern treatment is a reminder of the same truth our ancestors learned long ago.
Human survival has never depended on knowing everything. It has depended on learning just enough to make it to tomorrow.